Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's Tour Pro Talks. I'm Genevieve White, a travel and tourism copywriter, and I'm delighted to welcome my very special guest today, Benjamin Rhatigan. Hello, Benjamin.
Hi, Jenny. Very glad to be here.
Oh, thanks so much for joining us. And we're so lucky to have Benjamin with us today on this Tour Pro Talks, which is going to be all about brand building. Benjamin is the co-founder and strategy director of Arrival Projects, which is a brand agency which is devoted to helping travel, tourism, and hospitality businesses build their brands. Did I get that right, Benjamin?
Very good, Jenny. Perfect.
Was very, very wrong in her dress rehearsal. So I just wanted to check that I was actually getting it right. So welcome to Benjamin and welcome to our wonderful Tour Pro Talks audience. If you are watching today and you've ever wondered about your brand, or you've maybe not felt quite confident about your brand or how to build it, how to differentiate yourself from the competition, you're here in the right place because Benjamin has got a whole ton of expertise in helping businesses like yours grow their brand. And there's loads of comments already. Let's say hi. Hello, this is Amin from Discover Pakistan. Welcome, Amin. Thanks so much for joining us. And go, Ben, go, says Katie. Hello, Katie. And Kieran says hello from Ireland. Hello, Kieran. So let's, without much further ado, thanks for saying hello, everybody. Please do pop in at any point as well with any questions and comments. We'd love this to be as interactive as possible. But for now, let's get started with some of the questions. We're going to begin today by speaking a little bit about the philosophy of branding. So the first question I'd like to ask you today, Benjamin, is how has your approach to branding evolved over the course of your career?
Yes, I think like most people, when I first started off in branding, my perception was very much about the visual part of a brand. So I would
Mm.
think mostly about the logo or the font or choosing the color palette or maybe even the website or a slogan. And what I've come to realize with time is that branding is much more about building an emotional connection with your audience. So, on the part of a destination, the visitors that you want to come, or for a private company, hospitality, the people you want to stay at your hotel, for example. And so, the way to do that most effectively is through storytelling, because storytelling is something that is very relatable on a human level. And we have been doing it for millennia. It's the way that we communicate with each other most effectively. So now my lens has shifted from purely the visual part to really thinking about branding in a more kind of holistic way.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I guess that is. I really relate to what you've just said there about like getting a little bit obsessed with like colors and logos and things like that, because I think that's something that a lot of us just associate with the word brand, isn't it? But it's so important just to dig a little bit deeper. Now, I'm interested by some of I think it was maybe on your website I saw this, Benjamin, some of the language you use when you're speaking about branding specifically for travel, tourism, and hospitality. You speak about placemaking and place branding. So I wondered if we could just maybe unpack these terms a little bit more and if you could tell me why these are so important.
Yes, absolutely. So both placemaking and place branding are philosophical frameworks, so theoretical frameworks to put it one way. And I've been a strategy consultant for a long time, so I feel much more comfortable applying frameworks to things. But when we think of placemaking, it's really identifying the unique facets about a location. So something very special that makes it different from other destinations nearby. So it could be the historical background or something social or cultural, the political climate, or it might be something like a unique geographic factor. Or in the case of Bilbao, there's the Guggenheim Museum. So, what is it that really sets it apart from its peers? And once you've done that exercise, and I start all my client engagements with this type of exercise because I think it's so important. Once you've done this placemaking part, you take that information and you transition it into what we call the place brand. So, looking at those various factors and then figuring out the best way to compile them into a compelling story that's attractive to whoever you've decided that you want to be speaking to. So, it takes a lot of effort. They can take a lot of work, but I think that they're both really fundamental pieces before you can go into what we traditionally think of as the brand building exercise of choosing a logo and the colors and whatnot.
Mm, I think that sounds like a really fun process to go through, actually.
Yes, very
I
much
think
so.
people must enjoy it, and probably, sometimes it's just having that kind of distance as well from the destination, kind of, almost looking at it through somebody else's eyes and thinking what's special about it must be really quite eye-opening.
Yes, it's interesting because I think it's not something that people normally do about the place that they live in, and so when you take a step back and look at it objectively, you recognize that it is different, and every place has something special to offer, and you can do a similar exercise with organizations too, but it works most effectively with cities or nations or even regions, for example. I've done some place branding exercises on a country level, and that's really interesting because there's lots of different influences that go into that too.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, you spoke a little bit at the beginning about storytelling, but I'd like to go back and speak a little bit more about storytelling and its importance as well, and maybe just to unpick a little bit more about what storytelling actually means. I think some people, there's a tendency, we see this word storytelling everywhere, but sometimes people maybe get a little bit confused, or they think storytelling has to be kind of, almost like a big long story you'd had to have written at school with a beginning, a middle, and an end, and a once upon a time. So, can
Mm.
you maybe just talk a little bit more about storytelling and how it fits in with branding specifically for travel, tourism, and hospitality?
Sure. So I think storytelling again is just it's the way that we best relate to each other as humans. And if you look at oral traditions since the beginning of time, it's telling stories about what happened to people or communities or cultures or whatnot. So we're really programmed to absorb information through stories rather than someone telling us just about something. So when we have a narrative, when there's something that we can identify in ourselves, whether it's a hero character or something that really stands out, it triggers our brain to pay more attention to it and it makes it more memorable. And it's an interesting conversation that I have depending on who the organization that I'm speaking with is or the client that I have, because with travel tech companies, for example, it can be a challenging exercise to get them to tell a story because many of them focus first on product, which is understandable because they need a good product in order to get people to pay attention in the first place, or they talk about growth, but they haven't really taken a step back to think about how they're going to connect with the audience apart from that, the people who are going to purchase something. So it can take a little while for me to explain the value of storytelling to them, but once they capture that and they recognize that people buy from brands that they can identify with that have that link, that story to them, then it becomes easier to convince them that it's a worthwhile exercise. So storytelling is absolutely important for every part of brand identity.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just that human connection, isn't it? And it doesn't have to be any, kind of big long work of literature, just some little human touch in there. Like I got an email the other day from someone whose emails I subscribe to, and she was talking a little bit about storytelling, and she said, I'm writing this with a cold. And she said, that's a story, because immediately
Yes.
you think, oh, that's awful. She's got a cold. And you're human, so you connect with that. So
Right.
yeah, it's so
Yeah.
powerful, and it doesn't really need to be a big long literary masterpiece, does it?
No, it can basically be something that elicits that emotional connection that helps build trust and authenticity with the person that you're speaking to. Because when you feel that level of comfort is when you feel much more comfortable in trusting whatever you need that product to do for you. And often in the case it's giving someone money or asking them for a service. And if you haven't felt that emotional connection, it can feel more of a risk. And you don't want your organization to feel like a risk to a potential buyer. So tell your story.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's excellent advice. Now we've got Kieran saying, we the Irish are the best at it. I think he means storytelling. and yep, leprechauns.
Well, I
I'd
can
love
respond that my Irish family, I'm one quarter Irish, and they are excellent storytellers, very much so.
Yeah, there's nothing like a good Irish story, is there? Okay, let's get on with the actual, the legwork of brand building now, because there may be people watching who are really kind of wanting to kind of almost go through this as a process on their own businesses. So we'll talk about the big questions, because I think you've maybe already alluded to the fact that but a brand needs to really kind of sit down and ask itself the big questions. What do you think, Benjamin, are the questions that need to be asked when building a brand?
Hmm. Well, I think the first most important question seems obvious, but often isn't, and that's why are we doing this? And so the motivations from either the destination or the private organization can be very varied. And so thinking about is there a place that you went to that you liked that you want to replicate? Or is there an experience with a product that you had that you also want to replicate in your own organization? Or something that you didn't like that you want to do something completely different. So considering that motivation, I think is really crucial to being that first step. And then afterwards, looking at the who are you talking to? So who is the audience for this brand? And what I do with client engagements is we literally build these avatars, these buyer personas, where we find a stock image of someone and we give them a name and an age and whether they're married or not and if they have kids and what their challenges and motivations are. And we create this profile of this person who's going to be the one buying the product, and we speak to that person when we're deciding what the narrative should be or the messaging for the organization. And that really helps because again it's storytelling to that person. Another
Mm.
question that is really useful is what's the pain point that we're solving for this client? So, is there something that they've been struggling with? Is there something that they need or they're not getting from someone else that we can offer, or we can offer in a better way? And then also, questions about us, like what are we as the team, what are our values, our mission, what are we trying to accomplish with this? So that's different than the kind of who are we, and this is the kind of identity of what are we. So there are lots of different exercises for this, but I think it's really important to sit down and do those initial questions first, again before going into what we would think of the creative exercises of considering what the website might look like or choosing a logo.
And all this is time consuming, isn't it? I mean, I know because I've done it myself. It takes time, especially, the client personas, and yeah, it's worth it though, isn't it?
Very much so, because it gives you the background information and the foundational piece to build on what's going to happen later. So once you're out there in the open in public, once your brand has been released, there's kind of no claiming it back, right? It's for the public, and so if you take that little bit of extra time to ask about how you really want it to be structured, it makes it a lot easier down the line. And I do rebrands all the time for organizations, and there's no shame in doing a rebrand. But it's just interesting seeing the companies that have really taken the time beforehand to build their first brand, and whether they need to do a huge adjustment or it's just a light touch on some colors or whatnot, or if they've done a big pivot. And I could tell almost immediately who did that kind of fundamental groundwork beforehand.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it probably makes life so much easier if you've done the groundwork on your brand, because it's easier, if everything becomes easier, writing your copy becomes easier because you know exactly who you're writing to and
Mm,
what you want to say to them. So, yeah, however time consuming these steps might be, they're ultimately going to make your life much easier and your business more successful.
exactly.
Now, if you've just started watching this and you're thinking, what are these guys talking about? This is Benjamin Rhatigan, and we are talking about brand building. And do remember to ask Benjamin any questions you have. Benjamin, actually, I've got a question that's just popped into my head, and it's related to what you were talking about with ideal client personas. And it's something that I've always wondered about. So I'll ask you. Um, See, people may have, more than one ideal client persona. So say I'm just for an example, I live in Shetland. and say, one client persona might be somebody who's really keen on birding, and they might be one very specific type of person, but also a lot of people come here because of the wool and they love knitting. So that's another very different type of
Mm.
demographic. So then when I'm like writing, sometimes I might want to be writing to the birding person and sometimes to the knitting person, but it's always more effective to write to one person, isn't it? So what I guess I'm asking is, if people have multiple different client personas, who are they speaking to? And do they speak to different people at different times, or
Yeah.
what? Just
It's tough. It's
curious.
yeah, it's I mean, it really
Yeah,
it's a choice. It's a choice that you have to make because if you think of
yeah.
the what we were talking about with storytelling beforehand, people can really only absorb 2 to 3 different types of messages. So when you are thinking about your organization, you can probably get away with talking to 2 or 3 different types of people. But any more than that, and your message starts to get diluted. It starts to get a little bit too
Mm,
confusing. And what happens is that disrupts that trust that you're trying to build with your audience because people want to see themselves in what you're doing. And so if they say, "Oh, okay, well, maybe I'm not actually a bird, or this might not be really necessarily for me," and then they might try to look elsewhere, right? But it's really hard to feel like you're leaving money on the table. I recognize that because you want to be talking to as many different people as possible. And I was talking with a tour operator the other day, and they are very laser focused on taking. It was like German grandparents on 1 week hiking trips through the Alps, and every night they would have a Michelin dinner. And for me, that was so precisely laser focused that it was really easy to build a brand around that. And you can vary from that. You can try and talk to lots of different people, and there's ways to kind of massage that messaging where you take a step back from, and the example that you put of the actual activities, and you talk more about the region, and you can kind of
mm.
fit 2 or 3 things into that, or you focus on some other part of the value proposition that allows you to encompass everything else that you'd like to put in there. So there are tricks for it, but the important thing is to remember that people like to feel like you're speaking directly to them with your brand because they want to have that sense of trust and authenticity with you. So try not to get too far away from what your principal message is.
Brilliant. Yeah, I think that's excellent advice. Just keeping that message really streamlined and clear and focused. And I think it's a really good point as well, Benjamin, what you say about people don't like to feel like they're leaving money on the table. So there's this kind of instinct that people have to try and appeal to as many people as possible. But really, you're going to see so much more success, and life's going to be so much easier for you if you just kind of narrow things down
Mm.
and write that
And
one.
sometimes it also the market can sometimes dictate what that's going to be. So when companies launch, they might think that they are one thing, and the client will want to buy this one thing, or they might have 4 or 5 different things that they're offering, and then they realize 6 months later or a year later that the feedback that they're getting from their community is that people are really interested in product C instead of product A, which was the figure product. And so there's no shame in pivoting your messaging, your narrative, and focusing a little bit more on what the market is telling you. Because again, if this is a business and you're trying to get some money from it, you have to listen to what people are asking you for. So it's just a question of being attuned to what you are interested in and making sure that there's a good product market fit with who you think might be purchasing that.
Brilliant. Yeah. Okay, that sounds like very good advice. Now we've got another question coming from Amin, but I'm going to ask just a couple of other questions to kind of bridge the gap between your question, Amin. So hang on in there. I've seen your question, and we are going to answer it very shortly. So, Benjamin, I wondered if we could maybe speak a bit about some of the challenges that clients face when brand building. I think we've maybe touched on this a
Mm.
little bit.
Yeah.
Are there any more challenges that spring to mind?
Yeah, I think, building a brand is always challenging no matter who you are. It depends a little bit on the type of organization that you are too. So an example that I thought would be useful is when we're thinking about destination marketing, brand architecture is very important. And by brand architecture, I mean the hierarchy that you have of, let's say, a master brand and a sub brand. So if you think of Hilton hotels, for example, they have a portfolio of lots and lots of different sub brands. So Hilton is the master brand, and 4 Points, for example, could be the sub brand, right? And that's in the private sector. If you think in the public sector, building a brand is involves so many different types of stakeholders that there can often be conflict between them because their KPIs are different. So if you think of political organizations at a destination, or the tourism board, or private partnerships, or universities doing research, et cetera, everybody wants to feel represented and have their say. So this is why it's really important to do that kind of crucial place making and place branding exercises in the beginning, because if you start with the brand execution part, which is the logo and a website, and people who represent that organization don't see themselves reflected in that place, then no, they're not going to buy into it, and they're going to say, yeah, okay, well, we don't want to be a part of this. We're going to keep doing our different logo, and we're going to keep having our different messaging, and that can be really disappointing for a city that is trying to attract a certain type of person, be it a visitor, or if in the case of Atlanta, for example, in the US, I did a bunch of projects there, and they were trying to position themselves as the Silicon Valley of the Southeast of the US. And so that's attracting a very particular type of profile. But it took a long time for us to get buy-in from the different organizations to recognize that there's something that they wanted to get behind too. So that's absolutely a challenge, I think, on the destination part. And then again, on the private sector, what we spoke about earlier, narrowing down who you're speaking to is often the biggest challenge that I see. So you want to have very clear, precise messaging and a narrative for the people that you're trying to attract to your product, and excluding the people who are not necessarily not interesting, but not the most interesting for you to speak to, can be a big challenge psychologically at first, but it's very important.
So it really just keeps coming back to these setting the foundations and asking the big questions ultimately, doesn't it? Because without
Exactly.
if you've got that sorted, then you're maybe not going to come up against some of these challenges that you speak about later on if
Hmm.
you've got that at the beginning. Okay, we've got a couple of questions coming in now from our audience. So, well, maybe share these. I think this was a question we were going to speak about a wee bit later, but seeing as Amin's asked it, we'll talk about it now. So, what's your suggestion for a beginner to start with strong foundations? So, I guess that would come down to maybe a tour professional who's just starting to build their brand. What are the first steps they should take?
Yes, there are, first off, great question. There are lots of different exercises that you can do to help with this process. And so I think answering those first questions that Jenny and I talked about earlier, just sitting down and forcing yourself to write out, and why are we doing this? Who are we talking to, et cetera, is important. But there's an exercise that I do with clients that I really love, that sounds silly, so bear with me for a second, but I take about 15 or 20 different slides, and on each slide, there's a category of things. So on the first slide, there could be animals, for example. So a dog and a horse and a zebra and an elephant or whatever. And so we ask the client, and we usually do it in a group format, which of these best represents your brand. And I know it sounds ridiculous, but it really helps you kind of get out of your head, and away from the actual brand itself, and start thinking about what we really mean. And another slide could have cars on it, for example. Are we a Porsche or a Corvette, or a Toyota, or a soccer car, or whatever it's going to be? And it's really an interesting exercise, because you think that everybody on the team is going to be aligned and that you all have the same mission and values. but I can't tell you the number of times that I've been in a room and there's been the two founders from the organization, and one says we are absolutely a Porsche, and the other one looks and says, "No way, we're a Toyota. What are you talking about?" And so it can be this kind of aha moment at the beginning of the brand, because those guys really need to be aligned. You need everybody in the organization to make sure that you agree on what these different elements are, because when you do the actual brand representation later, if there's a discord with that, then your audience will notice that immediately. So if one founder is off saying that, we're the Porsche and Lamborghini of this product, and somebody else is saying, no, we're more of this kind of thing, then that can disrupt that trust that we've worked so hard to build with the potential clients. So I can send this to the team, anybody who's watching, if you want it later, but it's a really fun exercise, and there's always surprising results that come from it. But that's a good suggestion for getting a start.
I love the sound of that exercise. I suppose in some ways then solopreneurs are going to have it a little bit easier because they can be very clear. They're not going to have that compromise or discussion with somebody else. So it's maybe a little bit easier to build a brand if you're a solopreneur, would you say?
I think that's a great question. Being a solopreneur is very liberating because you can move very quickly. And it can also be very lonely because depending on your professional support network, and you really need people to bounce ideas off of. And with my own business partner who's based in New York, we've known each other since we were 15 years old. So we really know each other very well. We started off as friends, and we've been in kind of professional networks for a long time when we decided to launch this organization together. And the number of times that I've texted her or called her or sent a message with, a one-line question or a simple doubt about something seemingly really silly, just innumerable. And it just really helps to have someone else to talk to. So I think there are pros and cons to both of them. I know lots of solopreneurs who are doing really well, but it can be, it's tough at the top, especially if you don't have somebody to help you up there.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. I agree. Being a solopreneur myself. Here's Kieran saying, "All help will be welcomed here. Send everything." So yeah,
Very happy to, sure.
I think we all love the slides you were talking about. And just a reminder as well to everybody who's watching, there's Benjamin's sharing so much really valuable information here. And yeah, don't worry if you're thinking you might not remember it. I'll be putting a summary in the newsletter, which comes out on Wednesday. Here's Amin saying it's all very interesting and helpful. Thank you, Amin, and thanks everybody for watching. We're actually running out of time, which is a bit distressing, but I'll see if I can squeeze one or two more questions in. But here's another question from one of our audience. Quite an interesting question from Harriet. I'm curious how important you think the logo is to a brand.
Yeah, I think, well, the logo is very important. I mean, logo is often the first visual interaction that we have with a brand, and it can be the one key takeaway that people have with that interaction. So when we say any company's name, you almost immediately can think of what that logo would be for it. I don't think it should exist in a void. I think it's important to make sure that all your other ducks are in a row with it. But I'll give you just a quick example of when it might not work, which is the a kind of consistency of execution of brand is extremely important. And I had another client in the U.S. who had interns doing their social media work, which is fine. I'm have been an intern. We all love our interns. It's fine. But if they're not very closely supervised, what we noticed was that when they were doing their Instagram posts or the LinkedIn posts, the tone would change a little bit, or the logo execution would be a little bit different, or they might be very authoritative one day and very fun and flirty another day. So whatever you have, be it a brand Bible or a brand book or whatever you want to call it, and some of them are 50 pages, some of them have tons of really specific information. Make sure that you are consistent to it. So your logo should look exactly the same all the time, no matter where it's represented. Maybe you can have one or two variations of it, like black and white or a color, or if there's a lockup with a name or something. But your logo is sacrosanct, and you need to make sure that it's protected from interns.
Yeah, you don't want to confuse your potential customers, that's for sure.
Exactly.
Okay. Right. I think, sorry, I did say that we'd be going through the questions in a certain order, and we're going all over the place. But I'm trying to cherry pick what I think are the most valuable questions because we don't really have much time left. Um, I like this question here about what do you think are some effective methods for measuring the
Mm.
success of a strategy? So you've laid the foundations, you've got your brand strategy. How can you measure that that strategy is being successful?
Mhm, mhm. There are well, first off, there are lots of different metrics out there, and some of them are more indicative or useful than others. But I think it depends a little bit on what type of organization you are. So if you're a destination, there are campaign metrics like very basic ones, like the number of people that are coming, the visitors that you have, how many nights they're staying, how much they're spending. There are all kinds of digital marketing metrics like time on website and social media interactions, etc. But what I've seen recently, only in the last 2 or 3 years or so, that I think are really interesting, are metrics that talk more to uh, m- tourism in a holistic sense. And by that, I mean there was a metric I saw the other day that showed the number of phone calls to emergency services based on Airbnb noise complaints or results from resident satisfaction surveys with tourism. So I think anything related to that that gives more of a kind of a human relationship to what we as tourism professionals are trying to do, I think that can give us a good indication of whether the specific campaign that we're working on or a brand that we're working on is having the intended effect. So moving away from kind of classic metrics and looking more at the human side of things, I think is a really good way to interpret if you are telling your story and making that narrative that we've been discussing now in an effective way, if it's having the result that you're looking for.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, I would never have thought when I think of metrics, you tend to think of website visitors and clicks and bookings and stuff. But yeah, having a look at the human impact is so important, and then
Mm,
that can feed back into your brand as well, can't it? So
exactly,
it's
exactly.
yeah, excellent. Okay, brilliant. Well, Benjamin, I can't believe it, but we're actually out of time, and we've got lots of questions that we haven't even managed to cover. But I'm gonna be really cheeky, and I'm gonna squeeze one more in. Is
Sure,
that okay?
absolutely.
Okay. I just think it'd be really interesting to hear an example of a successful branding strategy.
Well, hi everyone. I think Jenny herself might have disappeared, but just in case this is still going, I'm going to answer her question, which was an example of brand strategy from the past that I think was useful. And so I'll give an example of Jenny.
Yes, I'm so sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, I was just starting
Successful
to answer your question in your absence anyways. So what I was going to say was, I worked on a project for Princess Cruises, the cruise line, that I thought was just really fantastic because it was what I would consider to be a 360-degree branding exercise. So we did work on the external brand, on the kind of the marketing side and what people saw, the potential cruise ship passengers and whatnot. But most of the focus on the project was on what we would call the internal brand, so the employer brand. And if you think of a company like Princess, at that point they had about I think probably about 30,000 people working for them. So the brand at the top of the organization in the executive suite was very clear and very coherent, but they weren't sure whether they were able to get that messaging down to everybody else in the organization. And the reason that's important is they have a really big focus on customer service and kind of going above and beyond the call of duty for their cruise ship passengers. And they wanted to make sure that everyone in the organization shared that value system and were employing it in their work, because when the external brand, so everything we've been talking about now, kind of what happens with the market outside, matches well with the internal brand, so that's the experience that the passengers had, that is the most seamless way to ensure that that trust is continuous, that rapport that you've built up makes sense for the client. So if the marketing promise is one thing, but the actual experience once the consumer is using that product is totally different, then you start to become worried about, is this organization something I can trust or not? And again, the
Mm.
converse of it is that you have this perfectly seamless brand where what people see with their marketing is the experience that they have. And that was what Princess was working towards. And so I just think that's a fantastic, really visionary way to look at what's happening with the organization, because a lot of companies don't take the time to make sure that their internal employer brand is as robust as their external brand.
Mm. That's an excellent example, and I think it sums up so much of what you've said today already about the importance of what makes the importance of brand building and the hallmarks as well of a really successful brand. If you're watching this and you're thinking you'd love to work with Benjamin, Benjamin, what's the best way of reaching you? Obviously, you're here on LinkedIn. Where else can people find out more about you?
Yes, I'm here on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect with anyone afterwards and answer any additional questions. And also, please feel free to look us up at arrivalprojects.com. So just the name of our company.com, and we'll be happy to connect with anybody there too.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, once again, Benjamin, thank you so much. I've learned so much from you today. You also coped very well with doing a solo show for a few seconds there. I disappeared. We've got lots of lovely feedback coming through from our audience. So thank you to our wonderful audience and for your questions as well. Um, I'll be, Tour Pro Talks is going to have a little holiday for a few weeks because I'm having a little holiday, family holiday away. So, but I'll be back in touch very soon with details of the next guest. But for today, I'd just like to say thanks again to Benjamin for sharing really valuable insights on branding with us. Thank you very
Thanks to
much.
you, Jenny. It was a pleasure.
Thanks. Goodbye, everybody.